Good morning. We are continuing the review and summary of the conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis, and we are on page 1463, where we returned to discussion that began literally 112 pages ago on page 1350, namely the triangle of the main, I'll say, forces that transform this world and fulfill the purpose of existence. The human being, that's a neshama that comes down below into this world as the main actor, the central figure, like it was in the beginning of creation. After 6 days of creation, on the sixth day, God created the human being and said, "La'avda la'shamra," or you're created to serve and protect and to transform and produce growth in this world, a Gan Eden, a garden. The second force is Ner Mitzvah and Torah Er. And those are the divine instruments, the divine tools that God gave us, with which we transform this world. So a neshama on its own can do, to some extent, work, but it's with Ner Mitzvah and Torah Er that you really can accomplish the job in the fullest sense of the word. Now you may ask, so where does tefillah, prayer, fit into this? So prayer is the primary service of the neshama on its own effort as it prays, Malmata Lamaila, from the bottom up, which was actually the theme of over 550 pages of Ayin Beis before page 1350. The Aliyah and the Yichud and the interface from the bottom up. So even though tefillah, you can say technically is a mitzvah, so it does belong in the category of mitzvahs, but it's not just a mitzvah in the sense where God gave us, here's the mitzvah. Tefillah is really from the heart. Ezu Aveda Shabalav Zui Tefillah, from the heart of the person reaching upward. So it has an element of a mitzvah in it that's also given to us by God, that concept, but it's primarily a human-initiated and a self-generated effort. Whereas Torah, on the other hand, is completely from above. It also has an element from the bottom up when we learn Torah, and especially Torah Shabbat Peh, the oral Torah. And a mitzvah is somewhat in between, because on one hand, it's Ratzon that God gave us the mitzvahs. We didn't come up with it on our own. On the other hand, the mitzvah is mislabish, manifests in the physical world. So all angles are covered here. Basically, a neshama with davening, and with mitzvahs, and with Torah, that is the way we fulfill the purpose of our existence, of existence in general, and especially, and also our specific existence. That's a general statement, which I think is good to keep in mind when we think about the whole picture. But the breakdown now is, as he comes back to, and I should add, and the mamat lamayl lamata is critical, because that's the two ways we do this, on our terms, that we integrate and we internalize and we through our efforts. And then there's mamayl lamata, which is more on God's terms. So you have a true interface. Both God is represented and we're represented, and you have a full connection between Hashem, divine, and existence, and both of them are not compromised, are fully part of the process, as we've discussed many times. And that really, in a way, is the essence of the general theme of Ayin Beis from the beginning. The idea of bringing together interface between God and existence. Now, obviously, there are many, many details. And in the first volume, he spoke a lot more about the very map and the structure of immanent energy, mamala kalam, and sevav kalam, and transcendent energy, and then the difference between the work of the patriarchs, the Ovis, and the Matan Teda, Chodesh, a new energy. But if you continue and look back at the whole Ayin Beis, this is really encapsulates the central theme, without going into all the, of course, breakdown of details. So where are we now? And I'm saying it also because we're coming here to literally the conclusion. We have another 14 pages to go. and then also the Rebbe Rashab never concludes, but keeping this in mind helps us understand what we're learning now, and also how this will ultimately come together in the conclusion, which we are somewhat speculating about or extrapolating from what the Rebbe Rashab does say, and from the source material, which is specifically related to what we're learning now, the Maimer of Chanukah in Torah of the Alter Rebbe, Mika Hashem Elokeinu Hamagbil L'Sheves Hamashpili Lires, and the Mittler Rebbe's long Maimer explaining that at length. So that's what we've returned to now on page 1463, and specifically, let's sum up what we learned yesterday. So he said the Ma'ata Tzarech Lahaviv. After the long explanation of essentially Erd Hariyah, which is the light of vision, how that plays a central role as an example of how a neshama comes down below. So initially, though neshama is like an eye that sees, but the dark, shcherani, when the neshama comes down below, it gets concealed in the body and the animal soul. So it needs support, and it needs an outside light, which includes, and I made an emphasis not to call Torah mitzvah support, even though technically they are a support, but the real Buyur Siyua uses Amalachim, the angels who are called Einei Hashem, the eyes, the supervisors, essentially the facilitators in the cosmic support system, the digestive system, the distributors, all the different words we used for the Malachim. Above that, there's the Einei Ha'eda, the leaders, the leaders of the people, Sanhedrin, Rabbanim, teachers, and so on. And there's Moshe Rabbeinu, who's the ultimate leader. And then there's Ner Mitzvah and Torah, which was discussed to some extent, but we'll learn about it more, especially some of it is coming from the Maimonim of Mik Hashem Elokeinu Hamagbil L'Sheves, that all of that helps the neshama ultimately see with its own eyes, to the point that it begins to see like the Etzem Koyach Hariyah, that when that the eyes themselves will see. And La'asud it will be in the fullest sense. But as we learned on the last page, that even now we have a me'enzeh through the thirst of the neshama coming down below, and in a state of darkness and concealment, it develops and generates and triggers a tremendous thirst and tzemoyin and rotzeh and longing to seek out godliness all the way to the highest levels. That's why the neshama below says to the neshamas above, Shcheir ani v'nava, I am dark but beautiful. Not just also beautiful, but even more beautiful because I have achieved this level of tremendous ava rabba and ava b'tainugim due to the distance, due to the midbar, the wilderness that I was in. Some of the chanafshi, which developed this tremendous thirst, and the desolation, all of that came to teach me to yearn for God, and not only that, teach us that all the Giluyim, even you, the highest neshamas, compared to Atzmus, is like a desolate, like he said, lifeless entity. Now he doesn't say that compared to the neshama. He said compared to Elam Esalyenim and all the Giluyim. But you can say the neshamas above also don't fully appreciate that level, and that's what happens. And that's a big part of what we were learning. So he says, once we understand that, so he says, this is summing what we learned up yesterday. Summing up what we learned yesterday, we'll understand what we began discussing on page 1350, which is the idea of Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam and Ner Mitzvah and Torah. Now, interesting, he doesn't say Torah here, because here he's still comparing Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam and Ner Mitzvah. And Torah he did discuss earlier briefly, and he never gets back to it in Ayin Beis. But as I said, we have plenty to work with to figure out what the Rebbe Rashab would most likely have said. So they both are called Ner Mitzvah. And he begins, we explained that what is a Ner? A Ner consists of, it's comprised of oil, shemen, and a wick, psila, the and the light it produces. And these three things are the Ner Neshama and the Ner Mitzvahs. And he begins to explain how they are in the Ner Neshama. The wick is the soul, the divine soul. And just like in the example, the wick draws the oil, and the oil gets absorbed and consumed in the light, the flame that it creates. And that's what causes the flame to be a boyer, a very clear and steady light. I'm using steady because that's the word he uses in Torah, but boyer literally means clear light. Which means clear, meaning that it's burning in a very effective way. Kamoy Kain, in the Nimshal, what is that? The Shemen, which is the animal soul, and the wick, the neshama that manifests in the body, draws this animal soul, that it should be encompassed by Eira Leki, the neshama, in the divine light of the soul. Nasi Yisrein, as we elaborated yesterday, and that causes an additional element. It increases both quantity and quality, but primarily quality, the Yisron Eir Banashama, even more than the Neshama would have on its own. As we learned at length, because it's the Nefesh Habamis, it's the distance that creates the thirst, and therefore causes the Neshama to elevate to a point of Avarabba and Avatanugim, till Ishtaba Begufa de Malka, as he explained primarily, especially from pages 1455 and on. So now let's continue. I was going to elaborate now, what is the Shemen exactly? So we know the Shemen is Chochma of the Nefesh Habamis, but he hasn't spelled it out specifically yet. We did learn it earlier, and especially in the Maimarim of the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, but based on that, and the next two lines are actually the actual language of the Alter Rebbe in the Maimar HaMagbila Shevis. So we're on the 7th line, top of page 1463. Here's where we continue. And if you want to follow the text and you don't have a sefer, the book, go to ayinbeis.com. All the pages there are scanned PDF files which you can follow online or print out. Va'inyanhu. Here's the inyan. So remember, everything in the physical world evolves from its spiritual counterpart. And to really appreciate, just like we say, a physical object is made up of elements, which are in turn made up of molecules, and in turn made up of atoms and subatomic particles and so on. So if you go into the spiritual dimension, it's made up of spiritual energies. And in general, it's the 10 spheres as they interact with each other. For example, the classic chesed, mayim, water comes from chesed, fire comes from gvura. So shemen is the level of chochma, kenoida, as it's known. Ukamoshe kosev apardis. Again, these two lines are actually the actual language from the Alter Rebbe's Maimon Tereh, be exact, page 39a. Ukamoshe kosev apardis. The pardis from the Ramak, Ramoshe Koraviro. What does he write? Hatam, the reason shemakol advorim nuchel lahitzi shemen. From all objects, from all things, you can draw oil. It's not just from olives. That's where you find canola oil, you find corn oil, you find oil from oil. Some of it is consumable by humans, some of it is not, is used more industrial. But oil can be drawn from everything. The gamma avonim yechem lahitzi shemen. Also from stones, from minerals, you can draw oil. I don't think I did, maybe back then when we learned it the first time, I may have looked it up. But the bottom line is, there is oil in every object. Now, I didn't do the research to tell you that literally everything in existence, you can draw oil. Maybe it's minimal, therefore it's insignificant, but it'll be worthwhile doing a search, and I'm sure you can find that this is consistent with science. Now, what's the reason for that? Because God created everything with Chochma. So therefore everything has Chochma in it. And Chochma is the root of Shemen. So the Shemen, the oil that exists in every object, is a sign of the Chochma that God infused in it when He created it. U'kamoshe kosav, Bereshis bara. So in the beginning of Chumash, of course, the first verse, God in the beginning, Bereshis bara, v'targum yenison. I think it's Targum Yonasan. It could be also Targum Yerushalmi. Tov Yud can be either, but they're both a Targum. In addition to Targum Onkelos, in many Chomoshim you'll find, and especially Mikroiz Gedelis, where they have all the commentary, there's also a Targum Yerushalmi and a Targum Yonasan. I think this is Targum Yonasan. Sometimes they could be both, actually. So Targum essentially is an Aramaic translation of the Torah. So Onkelos is the most famous one, the one we use when we admire the Sedra, when we go over the Sedra. And it's printed in all Chomoshim on the left in smaller letters. Rashi quotes it off in Targum Onkelos. Onkelos was a ger, a convert, who was a tremendous scholar, and he translated the whole Torah in Aramaic, and there are many, many diukim. He's from the earliest translators and also in a way commentator, because the way he translated a word, it's like translating from Hebrew into English. So if you're a real scholar who translates into English, you can learn things of how certain words were translated. But another Targum is Targum
was from the
Yonasan.
family of the Roman kings.
Yeah, it's a whole story, how they tried to get him back. Yeah. The Targum Yonasan translates like this. What's Bereshis? So we translate Bereshis as like beginning. He says, B'chochma sabara. That Bereshis is referring to Chochma, that he created it with wisdom. Interesting translation. So what do we see? That everything, B'chulim b'chochma sisa, everything is created with Chochma. Chochma is a level of Shemen. That's why physically there's Shemen in everything. But Amr Razal, and the Rebbe Rashab is elaborating. The Razal say, the question that says, Basar Maimoris Nivra Elam, says, with 10 statements, God created the world. So the Gemara asks, the Mishnah asks, well, in the Pirkei Avos it says, Halei b'maimerecha, but the Gemara asks the question, what do you mean? You count the Maimoris, there's only 9. Yehi Ur, to Yehi Adam, to Nivra Adam, but Salmenu, there's only 9. So the Gemara answers, Bereshis Nami Maimerhu. That Bereshis itself is also a statement. Even though Bereshis is the overall creation of everything, and Ur is the first specific creation, but we count Bereshis too, that makes it into 10. Bereshis Nami Maimerhu, V'yedua. But however, it is a different type of Maimer. The Bereshis hu Maimer Kloli. Bereshis is a general statement where God says, Bereshis bara l'kim s'shamayim v'sa'aretz, that created all of heaven and all of earth, which encompasses everything, as Rashi explains. Then later, from that, God drew out each specific creation. So it's a maimer kloli hakel kol ha'mamoros that encompasses all the statements, all the 9 mamoros. Why is he bringing this? Because this goes back to Chochma. That's exactly what Chochma is. U'kamay nekudas ha'chochma. Nekudas ha'chochma, the spark or the point of Chochma, he and nekuda klolis, it's a general nekuda, a concentrated point, like a seed. Shekol hapratim nechlolu b'nekuda zu behelam. All the details are encompassed within this point in a concealed way, like a seed, like a one cell that was fertilized before it begins to break down and split into other cells. So Chochma is this nekuda, like Bereshis, it's a nekuda klolis. So it's Chochma. V'hi k'moy koyach Hiuli. It's like a koyach Hiuli, shemen nimtzu kol protei hasechel. So the word Hiuli is a word used by the Ramban in the beginning of Chumash, in these psukim actually, and it's brought to Chassidus. It's actually, when you analyze the word, it's somewhat of a Greek-rooted word, but it means, the best translations, I think I've discussed this a number of times, is potential. But it's more than just potential, because also koyach and poil is potential and actual, but koyach is more of an active, already a faculty. It could be a hidden faculty, like you have the koyach ha-seichel, or the koyach ha-ksiva, the power. But hiyuli is a step before koyach. That when in the process, and everything is an organized process, it's not quite the etzem, obviously, and it's not koyches atzmim, but it's called koyches hiyulim, or sometimes use just the word koyach hiyuli. It means it's like an archetype. That's also another way of explaining it. Like you'll say, what's the koyach hiyuli of fire? They'll say sometimes the eish yisedi, the archetype of fire. So the point being is it's not quite developed yet. It's not yet actualized. That's why he's calling it Kamoy Koyach Hiuli, Shememenu Nimtze Kol Pratei HaSeichel. So even though Chochma is already Seichel, but you don't have any details in it yet until Bina comes, until you flesh it out and develop it. But it's all concentrated within Chochma. So sometimes it's compared, like he's saying here, Koyach Hiuli. So Koyach Hiuli. In a sense, so God created everything in a concentrated point. Somewhat like the way they explained the Big Bang. That first everything was concentrated, then the universe began to expand and develop into details. And very much like this development of a seed into a blossoms into a sapling and into some growth, whether it's a flower or a tree or a brush or a shrub rather. Same thing with a child. That one cell splits, and a little while later, after the first trimester, second trimester, you see it develop into all the organs and limbs and all the details of the development of a fetus. So that's Chochma. In essence, it's created. It's an existent entity. So everything starts with Chochma, and since everything is created with Chochma, Chochma is Shemen, therefore there's Shemen in everything. Which, if you think about it, before I continue reading, I'm going to speak more details about this. It's actually quite fascinating, quite eloquent, because what you're seeing here is a certain element of, besides the cohesion of it and the design and the organization, there's also, in other words, everything in existence has the Nekud Klalis of God's intention in it. Now, for example, if Chochma was one thing, and then comes another stage, which is not taking the details out of Chochma, in a sense you could say, do we have a connection to that point of departure? So Chochma would be God's vision of existence as it manifests in a seed. And what is that seed? Chochma. So now when all the details come out of Chochma, they're essentially all really connected and all have within them, fundamentally in their etzem, they have a Nekud of Chochma, which is, we're going to learn the Nekud of Shemen. So Shemen is like the essence of it. So even though it later comes down into details, Bina, Chochma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, etc., and all the details of existence, everything has Shem and Chochma within it, so it all, if you activate it through Avodah, you actually connect it all to that one Nekuda where it all began, and Chochma, of course, itself will connect us to Keser and to the levels of the divine that are higher than Chochma. So that is a critical piece, and that's why he's elaborating a bit on this. It's not just giving us that Shem and Chochma are the same level. Also, it's part of the whole story of the interface of existence and the divine, which is the theme of Ayin Beis as I began this class today. So this theme is captured in microcosm in the process of creation. That God didn't just create fragmented pieces. Everything began in one central nekuda, one central concentrated point, what he calls Koyach Hiuli, and from that the details came out of that. If you think about it from a purely intellectual perspective, as we've discussed a number of times, when you are conceiving of an idea, you have a brainstorm, a flash, and then you begin to flesh it out. Very often what happens is as you go into the details, you sometimes lose the point of departure. You can see it very often. I mean, it's happened to me so often that I take the idea from Chassidus that what you should do is always write down what is your first flash. So then when you start breaking it down and you start discussing it and even arguing about it, and I say arguing, I mean developing it and trying to really fully break it down into details that are actionable and so on, by going back to the Nekuda Chochma, you can have that connection and make sure, like the Chassidus has the expression, not to go b'derech haklosin. Klosin is a word, not to wander off where you're completely off the reservation, so to speak, which is possible to do. It's like you're traveling. You start at a certain point, you start traveling, at some point you forget, you lose your way. You don't know where did we begin. The same thing intellectually, keeping that in mind, which is in a way what I'm doing, what I do all the time, and I'm doing now as well. Like, what is the central theme, the Chochma of Hemshech Ayin Beis? Or what's the central theme of Chassidus? It's always good to keep that in mind, because when you go into the details, and sometimes the details are very, very consuming and very elaborate and complex and intricate, that you always keep sight of what is the Nekudas HaChochma, what's the general idea, what is the objective of everything we're doing here? So that is another element in understanding why there's shemen in everything, chochma in everything. And then when it breaks down into detail, it comes into the details, but those details still have and retain that essential point, which in a way is also, and I don't want to go too far with this, but if you think about it, that's what in neshama, when it comes down below, it never loses sight of, well, it's concealed, but it never loses its essential divine qualities. It's concealed and it needs to be ignited, it needs to be fanned, it needs to be revealed. Just as an aside, even though I stay away from that because here ultimately shemen is going to be the nefesh habamis, but generally speaking, right now he's talking about oil and everything, so there's shemen in everything. Maybe just a little more elaboration. Now, in this parentheses, which I see, how long is this parentheses? Okay, it's around 8 lines, 8 or 9 lines, is a parentheses where he's going to explain a little more about Chochma as a Hiuli in context and comparison to the details that come from it. So clearly, if the Rebbe Rashab is saying it, it must be relevant to the whole picture. But I again don't want to lose sight of the Nekuda, as we just said, which is that there's shemen in everything, a shemen is Chochma. This is all coming to explain the idea of the Neir, where there's oil, wick, and flame or light. So let's not forget that's where we're getting back to. But that's going to be, it's going to elaborate a bit. We'll get back to that later in the bottom of the page. But now it's still elaborating on Chochma Shemen and what exactly Chochma is. And then we'll bring it back to the oil and the way it's explained in the Maimer here about how the oil interacts with the neshama and so on. You may have questions, but I think some of the questions may be answered in the parentheses. So I would wait till the end of the parentheses to see how this is going here. Unless somebody wants to ask me something specifically about what we just learned, the actual lines, I'm happy to take any questions. Okay.
I'm wondering if the statement that oil can be extracted from everything is perhaps the Rebbe means in some metaphoric sense. I've been doing a little bit of research on the internet while you've been teaching, and although there are certain types of stones, for example, that you can extract oil from, like oil shale, fracking, if you will. In general, the computer says that not every created thing, you cannot extract oil from every created thing. So ChatGPT is suggesting it means that the Chochma, the Shemen represents Chochma, and that there's divine wisdom in everything, and that it's hidden, but it can be revealed, and that everything is made with that wisdom. So everything contains an Or Eloki.
That's a given, that's for sure. But the question is if there's actual oil. If you're saying, I said before, if you search, you're saying it's not found in everything. It's really a question on the Pardes, not on the Rebbe Rashab or the Alter Rebbe. The Pardes is the one that says it. So I would do more research and ask if there's any explanations on the Pardes. Maybe there's someone that explains it, maybe some commentary. But I understand what you're saying. It's possible. That's scientifically, maybe you can extract oil, but doesn't mean that there isn't some type of material that is in the elements. And maybe science doesn't recognize that as oil. That's also
the other thing that's suggested is that,
but the suggestion that's a given that everything has chochma. That's not. You don't need anyone to tell. That's obvious. The question is, I would say that it could be there's a thing called some substance in everything that science wouldn't call oil, but it's still in there because look, even a inanimate mineral stone is not just pure stone. It has other pieces. It's usually a composite of a compound of several different elements.
Yeah, no.
Like for example, we say everything has eish, ruach, mayim, ofar.
Right.
You open a stone. Most stones don't have water, but there may be some watery elements in it that can't be. You can't touch it. It's not going to be wet. but it still means there is something in there. That's what I would lean towards saying.
Well, the other suggestion it had is that, for example, atomic energy, like uranium, it's not oil per se, but it releases a tremendous, like, amount of energy. It has atomic power. In that sense, it's a fuel source.
Yeah. Okay, that could be another way of explaining it. Yes, but I would look to see. Maybe the question would be, what every existing entity is it? None of them are pure. That's for sure. Everything is a compound. That's a rule in science that I remember when I learned chemistry.
Yes.
Everything is a compound. The question is, what does that compound consist of? Is there anything in there that may be what the Pardes would call shemen? Remember, shemen doesn't have to mean oil that you can light. I mentioned there's oil that is mechanical oil. You mentioned fracking. So that's the point here. And he does say the words, the Pardes does say, what does he say? Shemekol hadvarim nucha lohetzi shemen. From everything you can draw shemen. Gam avonim yecheil lohetzi shemen. Even from stones. So the question is, what does that mean? And that's something fine. Continue the search. Whatever you find, please share it.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
I think what Yitzchak said is very good. It's something. Shemen can mean like some sort of energy, something non-inert or potentially non-inert.
That's a good, yeah, correct. That it's possible. As I said, I don't remember if I ever researched this, but it'd be interesting to see also. Remember, the Pardes says that the question is, anyone else say it with those words? Again, it's interesting. He doesn't say everything. He says from everything you can draw shemen, lahitzi shemen. So what does that exactly mean? And when he says mechol hadvarim, does he mean actually everything, or does he mean from most things? I mean, kol means everything, but it could sometimes also mean that not just olives and not just natural sources for oil. Now, I do know that when it comes to cooking oil, I know it's relevant to Pesach. Like you don't use corn oil, but they have all the different types of oil that comes from all. So from vegetation, maybe he means from all forms of tzemeach, there can be oil. That would make sense. Not that it's all usable, but because vegetation by definition is moist and it has probably some form of oil in it. Because then he says, and Shem Kola Protim, he says even the Gamma Avonim, but Avonim is clearly not vegetation. So anyway, this could be analyzed further. Let's see what we find.
If I can say what
I just want to say, it's an interesting topic, but remember, it doesn't really change the pshat in Ayin Beis because the point is understood. I just want to make that clear. That's not like we can't understand what Ayin Beis is saying until we get this clear. But it's still fascinating to understand what this line means.
if we
It's
will
like
take
Evan b'tzorach halomish.
Sorry? Didn't hear.
I said it's like Evan b'tzorach halomish, like oil b'tzorach halomish.
That's
You don't
interesting
see the
example.
light,
That's
but
like a
it's
Flintstone.
there.
Like a Flintstone. Well, that's similar to what Yitzchak and Tzvi just said, that there's like an element of fuel that can, like a Flintstone. You crack open a Flintstone, you're not going to find fire or sparks in it, but when you strike it, it'll give off a spark. Yeah, that may be interesting also. That's like a real koyach Hiuli, actually, a Flintstone, because there's no fire in the stone. It's not like a hot coal, but at the same time, it's a source. A spark can be extracted from it. Okay. Anybody?
the attribute of shaman shouldn't take in literal form. It might be if we are trace as a fingerprint of God everywhere, like a Chochma in everywhere. It might be a sign that is not exactly a shaman, but something that follow in development. It would be a shaman in a next stage of existence, creation.
Well, that was the first explanation that Yitzchak shared. That it means
yes,
if you can't find any shaman, it means the Chochma within it. Yeah.
Yes. And as a fingerprint, shaman, I can see it as the explanation why everything was sanctified with shaman, like going back to Chochma in everything and see everywhere, especially in a sanctity, the sign of shaman as a fingerprint of God.
Okay. As he's going to explain soon more about the shaman, what that means, its significance. But okay, thank you all for this. Let's continue now in the parentheses. What you just said, Meira, is correct. Whether that's the meaning in the Pardes that there's Shemen b'chol davar, I'm not sure, but it's correct regardless. It is correct that everything has Chochma. That's the whole point he's making here. God created everything with Chochma, and that Chochma is, you want to call it the fingerprint of God, is a good way to put it, has that divine spark, so to speak, within everything that's there. That's the Nekudas HaChochma, which he's calling Shemen. But if you can actually find that everything can be served as a form of fuel, as you put it, that would make it even more powerful, because it's not just symbolic chachma, it actually produces some type of energy, which would be very interesting. But that makes sense also because in science, all matter is energy. You know,
Yes.
if you think of E equals mc squared, is a clear, every piece of matter, even stone, is a form of energy. Even a stone that has no, you can't find it. So maybe the word for shemen can be the source of energy, as you were suggesting, Yitzchak, and that's possible. But let's see what we find. Maybe there's more to it. Maybe there isn't.
And everything can be convert to the energy just through that.
Yeah,
Small element.
I once gave a talk connected to Shavuos, actually. The original E equals mc squared, that was by Matan Torah, where energy and matter were integrated, that you could transform and spiritualize the material world. That's what happened by Sinai. So I said that may be the source of where Einstein, even though consciously maybe he didn't take it from there, but the idea that everything in existence is really divine energy. But let's see where that goes, because we're going to learn about that a bit soon when he gets back to Shemen. So let me go to the parentheses now. He's going to ask, well, he's going to qualify the statement that we just said, that Chochma is Hiuli. He says, V'ayim mashin is bar le'il, and look into what we learned earlier, was explained earlier, the Nekudas HaChochma eina k'may Hiuli. So it's actually, I have to find where it is. I don't remember where that exactly was said, but there is, it could be in volume 2. We need a little search for that. It said earlier that Chochma is not like a Koyach Hiuli. Here he just said that Chochma is like a Koyach Hiuli, what I call a potential, or I sometimes call it a nebulous state, or it can be like a nebulous state, or in science they use a word for it. I'm trying to find what the word is. It's like it's a synonym with
potential
nebula.
energy?
No, potential energy I used already. There's a scientific word for nebulous, which is like when they say a star is forming, or an asteroid is forming. There's a state where it hasn't yet been shaped into details, but it's already been born, the birth of a star. There's a word for it. I think maybe nebula may be the right word. Maybe there's another word. Anyway, so he's saying that earlier we learned that it's not like a koyach hiyuli, meaning it's more than just hiyuli. I'm sorry. Because in hiyuli, you don't actually have details. You know, you think of it like even a seed doesn't actually have the details. It's the potential for the details. But Nekudas HaChochma nimtzu apratim. The details are there. They're concealed and not discernible. Oh, now I do remember where this was. This was earlier in this volume. Now I remember the Einim Nekadim. If you remember, he spoke about different stages of. It was when he spoke about the Ma'irich Be'echad. Remember, it was on the right side of the page. He spoke about the different levels of how existence comes into being. So I think there he said there's stages where it's not nicker yet, and then where it's nicker but it's still concealed. Okay, so I'll find it a little later. Or if you do a little search, we have our resident searcher. Then I'll find it soon. But there he said that it's not like a Hiuli, because in Chochma, there are details. However, the details are concealed, and they're not discernible. Whereas, Mashenk in a Hiuli, who she'ein bo mitzias hapratim klal. But a Hiuli is in a state where it doesn't have any details altogether, even though the details will ultimately come from it, but it doesn't have them yet. It would be like maybe like the Flintstone. Maybe an example, because it's not like there's any fire inside the stone. I'm not sure if that's the best example, to be honest. I think Hiuli is, in other words, a step up from Chochma, according to what we learned earlier. Ve'im nemar, and this is the qualification. Ve'im nemar shak Chochma hikei Hiuli, and if you're going to say that Chochma is a kei Hiuli, this like potential that does not have details, Hainu b'chinas atzmus ha-Chochma, just 1 second, let me just see. Okay, so he's struggling with this question: how much Chochma, how close Chochma is to details, or is it beyond details? So I'll just read it and then I'll explain. Ve'im nemar sha'Chochma kei Hiuli, and if you say that Chochma is a kei Hiuli, like he said here earlier, Hainu, that would mean it's referring to b'chinas atzmus ha-Chochma. So notice in Chochma itself there are levels. Atzmus ha-Chochma is the core of Chochma. But that's not Chochma as it's the beginning of Seichel. That's Chochma as it's the Mokar HaSeichel. Atzmus HaChochma, and that's the Koyach HaMaskil, the power to conceive of an idea. You don't yet have an idea, that's why there are no details. You only have the power to conceive of an idea, Mokar HaSeichel. So then you could say it's Hiuli. But then it's talking about Atzmus HaChochma, not Chochma, not regular, not the concept that you conceived. The Efsher, maybe you can say, the B'chinas HaChochma, Ime Yeshu Zeh B'chinas Nekuda Legaba HaSichlim, that Chochma, even though it's a Nekuda, like a spark, a point, compared to the Sichlim, meaning compared to the actual ideas, the Kamoy Kein Lamaila, and so too is it above. B'chinas HaChochma Lamaila, Hi Nekuda Legaba Kol Mash Nizgala, Mizgala Bebina, then the Chochma is like a Nekuda, 1 point, compared to all that will be revealed, the details in Bina. Hinezeu b'madregas Atzilus. So what would be Atzmus HaChochma Lamaila? That would be in the level of Atzilus. Aval Mash HaChochma Hireishis L'kol Mash Nisava Be'elamus. That's Atzmus Chochma. Koyach HaMaskil, that would be as Chochma is in Atzilus. But as Chochma becomes the Reishis, Bereshis, remember, the Targum, Yonason translated to Bereshis B'chuchmasa, so it's already the beginning of creation. It's not just the potential to create. It's not just the power to create, not just the power to conceive, but the actual conceiving, L'kol Masha Nisava Be'elamus, to everything that exists in the worlds, Yeshlei Mashi Kamoy Hiuli.
It makes sense.
Hold on, let me work it through a second. Give me a second. So the Nekudas HaChochma, he says, Ein Hiuli, because the Chochma is already the Pratim. So if you say Chochma is Hiuli, talking about Atzmus HaChochma Koyach HaMaskil, let me continue reading and then I'll try to explain. So this would be called Hiuli. That would mean that even higher than that is not even Hiuli. That's what he's trying to say. That's like Hiuli Shari Biyah, who be'ena rech legab Atzilus, because Biyah is infinitely distant from Atzilus. Vimkein Yitaken, and therefore you can say the B'chinas HaChochmi, B'chinas Shlila, Ma'apratim Eid Yesem in Hiuli al derech Moshel. So then you could say that Chochma negates details even more than Hiuli, for example. I may have misread the whole thing, so let me just think it over. I first thought that he's asking that Nekudas HaChochma is not like Hiuli, because Hiuli doesn't have details and Chochma has details, which
He
means that
did
Hiuli,
ask that.
which means that Hiuli is higher than Chochma. But here it appears that he's saying the opposite, that Chochma is higher than Hiuli. So I have to figure out what this means here. I'm a little confused, to be very frank, because in the beginning I thought
Could
he's
I?
saying that. One second, let me finish speaking. I'm middle of a sentence. Let me just finish. I'm already confused. Let's not confuse it further. One second. Let me just talk it through a second. So, first he says that it's not like Hiuli, because Chochma has pratim and Hiuli doesn't have pratim. There's something I'm missing, clearly. Not that it's just something I'm not getting here. If somebody wants to weigh in, by all means. But then he says that it's higher than it's higher than a Hiuli. I don't understand that. You want to answer the question, or you want to ask the same question I'm asking?
Yeah.
Go ahead. I can't hear you. Okay, I don't remember how I taught it the first time, but something I'm not getting here. We can't hear you, Rab Shlomo, just for the record. We can't hear you.
Could you hear me now?
Yeah.
So in the beginning, he is saying that Nekudas HaChochma there are pratim רק שהם בהלם, but Hiuli ain't boy metzius hapratim.
Exactly.
And if we want to say, let's look that the Chochma is a koyach Hiuli. It's not a question. It's talking about Atzmus HaChochma.
I know that. I explained all that, but how does that fit with what he says at the end?
Okay,
at the end he says that Chochma is higher than Hiuli.
Okay, if you let me say a little more. So the koyach hamaskil, mokar haseichel, this is Hiuli. Now he said that even though that bchinas hachochma is a nekudo legabe hasichliim, but this is only in madregas ho'atzilus. There we could say that it's not a Hiuli. אבל מה שהחוכמה היא רייסס לכל מה שניסה בו אילומס, this is like a Hiuli, because Bia is so far לגבי Atzilus. So how could be the Chochma is Shlilomer? No, according to this, it's possible that the Chochma is even more than a Hiuli, because the Chochma is an Atzilus, and Bia is Be'eina Roich legabe Atzilus.
But when you said Chochma is an Atzilus, you said that's Hiuli, like Koyach HaMaskil.
No, Chochma in Atzilus is not Hiuli, because it's like a nekudo legabe hasichliim. Higher than Atzilus, it's like a Hiuli. And he wants to prove it. He said, like when you are comparing Chochma, even in Atzilus, legabe kol ma shenishabe ba'olamas, bia.
You understand what you're saying? You understand what you're saying? So what do you? So tell me, how many levels are there here? Let's sum it up.
Okay.
Yeah, how many levels?
I think there are 3 levels. The first level that Hiuli is higher than Chochma, because in Chochma there are metzius hapratim. But if you want to say that Chochma...
One second. So Hiuli is higher than Chochma,
because
but is it higher than Atzmus HaChochma?
No, that's before he's talking about Atzmus HaChochma.
So let's go from all the levels. Is the highest level Atzmus HaChochma, or is there something higher than Atzmus HaChochma?
He said we could, It is higher, but we could say im noimar.
So go through the highest, the whole parentheses. How many levels do you see, and spell them out?
The first highest level is that Hiuli is higher than Chochma, because in Hiuli ain't boy mitzius apratim klal.
So what level is that? Is that atzmus hachachma? Is that koyach hamaskil?
No, here is not talking about atzmus hachachma. Here is talking.
Okay, so then you're not answering the question, because he's comparing it all. You can't just talk about it separately. So where's Chochma? So you're saying the Hiuli that's higher than Atzmus HaChochma,
No.
is higher than that Hiuli?
He's not talking about Atzmus HaChochma in the beginning. Right away, he said, if we want to say that Chochma is a Kroyach Hiuli, we could attribute that to Atzmus HaChochma, which is Kroyach HaMaskil Moker HaSeichel. That's what he's saying. Im Neumar, if he want to say
I know how to read the Hebrew, but it doesn't sound to me that I don't understand the levels here. What's what? Is Chochma higher than the Hiuli? Is it lower than the Hiuli? Which Chochma is higher?
In the beginning,
Atzmus HaChochma, he clears. He says Atzmus HaChochma is Hiuli.
Yes.
So what do we have here? Higher than the Hiuli or lower than the Hiuli?
No,
is it a Hiuli? Can you explain that?
Yeah.
That's the question on the table. What you're saying, that Pirush HaMilas of what it says here, I know.
I'm not talking about
the problem is, how does it fit all into each other? What level are we talking about here? Which one? What's what?
Okay, the first thing he said that
you feel you have it clear?
Yeah.
So why don't you just tell me the levels? Just spell them out.
Okay. So the first
don't read to me the parentheses.
Okay.
Tell me in simple English, what are the levels? What is the highest level that you know after the whole parentheses? What's the highest level?
That the Hiuli is higher.
No. So what is Hiuli? Higher than Atzmus HaChochma?
No. He's in the beginning. He's not talking.
Okay. You know what? Let's stop here, because
he's saying
you're not answering my question. So one second. It's fine. If you feel you understand it, great. I don't understand it.
But
if anybody else wants to, I don't want to go in circles.
What don't you understand?
I just don't. That's all. Maybe I don't get it. What can I tell you? I just don't understand what you're saying. You're telling me Pirush HaMilas, which I know them. You're not telling me the levels. Now, let me stop for a moment. It's already 10:30.
Hiuli is Atzmus HaChochma. Yeah. Hiuli is Atzmus HaChochma.
You just said Hiuli is higher than Atzmus HaChochma.
You pressuring me. The way that he's saying is.
I'm trying to ask you, which one is it?
He said, if we want to say that
Chochma is
Hiuli,
you're telling me Hiuli is Atzmus HaChochma and higher than Atzmus HaChochma and lower than Atzmus?
No, Hiuli is Atzmus HaChochma.
So why does he say Chochma is higher than Hiuli?
Because then he said, Efshar, as Bechinas HaChochma is even higher than Hiuli. And he's explaining
Explain that. You can't say Hiuli is Atzmus HaChochma and Chochma is higher than Atzmus HaChochma.
No, Atzmus HaChochma is higher than Hiuli. That's what he said after that. You want to allow me one more sentence?
No. Listen,
okay,
I heard
good.
you. I don't get what you're saying. Maybe you get it. I don't.
Okay. Say it up. To me, understanding.
Go ahead. You want to add something? If you want, we don't have to go in circle, but if you want to add something, go ahead.
I'm totally lost. Can you just explain what's the big picture here? Why is this? How is this relevant? Like this particular teaching, like in the bigger scheme of things. What are we trying?
Very relevant.
No, I'm not. If Rabbi Jacobson could explain, I'm trying to understand why we're drilling down on this so hard. I mean, obviously it's important to understand it, but I'm so lost. I don't even understand how this fits into the flow.
Well, I'm first trying to understand the pshat of it before I get to the flow. The flow is, he's wondering, since Chochma is, like he called it a koyach Hiuli, that it is the spark, so to speak, within everything, the Chochma within everything, like the Shemen within everything. Since he called it Hiuli, he wants to reconcile it with what he said earlier, whether that Chochma is not Hiuli, because it actually has details in it. In other words, the question here is how close Chochma is to details. In Hiuli, generally does not have details. Chochma does have details. So he's trying to drill down and try to understand that. The relevance of the big picture is, like I said earlier, we want to have a connection that everything in existence has Shem and Chochma within it. The way Marie Era put it before, the blueprint of the fingerprint of God, or the footprint, etc. So he's trying to understand the connection, how close Chochma is to the details. That's the general question here, the general discussion, I should say. I'm trying to understand this, the specifics. What's his conclusion here? There's no problem saying there's several ways to understand it, which seems to be part of the picture here. Just I can't figure out. First, he says that Chochma is more details, and Hiuli doesn't have details. Then he says, if you say Chochma is a Koyach Hiuli, like he said here, you have to speak about the power of conceiving of an idea, not the idea itself, because an idea has details, and Chochma as well. So there's Atzmus Chochma and there's Chochma itself. That's what he brings next. And then the Atzmus Chochma would be the Hiuli, like he says. And Lamaila, that's how Chochma is an Atzilus. But then how Chochma becomes Reishis, which means how Chochma suddenly becomes not just Atzmus, Koyach HaChochma, but it becomes the beginning of creation, then he says that would be called Hiuli. So then how does that consistent with what he said before, that Hiuli would be Atzmus HaChochma? That I don't fully understand. That's where I'm getting confused. With the end seems to be, it turns it around. I'm not sure what he's saying exactly.
Thank you. Even just your explaining your confusion was extremely helpful. Thank you very much. That
Now
was
the
extreme.
Efsher, the fact that he says Efsher means he's coming to explain it maybe a different way. That would be the way. Maybe that's what you're trying to say, Rab Shleiman. That the first half he's explaining it one way, and the second half he's explaining it a different way. That's possible.
Yes.
But give me,
Yes.
listen, huh? What?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Okay. So I need to read this a little on my own. That's all. It's normal. It's perfectly fine. I'm happy that it's recorded. This is the process of learning. You don't always get it the first time. I am confused by it, but I'll read it again. Maybe that's what he's saying. And be interesting if you can go back the way I explained it 2 years when we learned it the first time, how I explained it then. I'm sure we went through this as well.
I'm going to Blinette or go back and look at that and share that with everybody.
So it could be the first half, he's wondering if the Kudus HaChochma is a Hiuli, and the Efsher, he goes now a different way to explain it.
If I remember it correctly,
1 second. Shehi Kamay Hiuli. And then the Yatakin, that Chochma is even more, less, negates details even more than a Hiuli, is also interesting to that extent. So which level of Chochma is that? Okay.
Well, he does say that, he says that it's like that Chochma and Atzilus is like Hiuli. He doesn't say it is. He says in the sense that it's almost like it's a shoresh. He's not saying it is. He's saying it's like that. Kamo Hiuli.
That's not relevant here. Kamo Hiuli, and then he says it's higher than a Hiuli, and earlier he said it's lower than a Hiuli.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the point here.
Mm-hmm.
the shoresh of Chochma is in Kesser, yes? The shoresh of Chochma is in Kesser.
Yes.
And that's why it's higher than Hiuli.
1 second. What you just said, why is that the case? Maybe the Kesser is Hiuli. Okay, let's stop here. I'll go over the parentheses. I'll try to figure it out. I'll share my findings. We'll stop here. It's a good place to stop anyway. I have to go. Middle of page 1463. We'll review the parentheses again. Anything you see from the previous classes, Yitzchak, when I taught it the first time, would be helpful. Maybe that will make it clarify everything. But I will look into this a bit more.
What line did you end on? Like, what was the last word you translated?
The end of the parentheses, Me'inyan Hiuli al derech mashal. The last line starts, V'im kein yetakin.
Thank you.
I'm almost sure I discussed it. Okay, let me stop
check.
here.